So yes, welcome everyone. This is our final panel. Can you believe it? We're already in week 5. And again, today we're going to be joined by 4 STEM professionals within the green energy field, which is very broad, but hopefully you all can learn quite a few things from all of our panelists today. These are our panelists. Before I introduce our panelists, we're going to return to a poll we asked at our very first panel, which was, how much do you know about the actual work of scientists and engineers? And if the poll could be set, give you all a few seconds to answer that. And while we're waiting, this was what the results were in our very first meeting. And I'm gonna end the poll and share the results. Okay, so looking at over the course of the past 6 weeks and looking at the past 5 panels, a lot more people, or at least there are less people who know just a little bit about what some scientists and engineers do, and a lot of people are starting to learn a bit more. So with that, I'm going to introduce our 4 STEM professionals. And our first is Fred Tutman, and Fred is a grassroots community advocate for clean water with Maryland's longest and deepest interstate waterway, and also holds the title of the Patuxent River Keeper, which is an organization that he founded in 2004. And he's also among the longest serving water keepers in the Chesapeake region and the sole African-American water keeper in the nation. Prior to river keeping, Fred spent nearly 25 years working as a media producer and consultant for the BBC, and worked as a consultant and media producer on telecommunications and assignments all over the globe. In addition to duties as a water keeper, Fred also teaches and advises in the graduate studies program of Goddard College in Vermont and has also taught classes in environmental law and policy at various colleges, universities, and law schools. Our next panelist is Amarilis, and she has about 17 years of experience overseeing environmental and social sustainability in the construction, operation, and decommissioning of energy infrastructure and industry development projects domestically and abroad. At present, Amarilis works as an independent consultant advising international development clients. And she holds an executive master's degree in natural resources management from Virginia Polytechnic and State University, and a bachelor's of science in environmental systems engineering from Penn State. Our next panelist is Emily, and Emily is an energy engineer with experience in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or GHG, increasing resilience and improving sustainability of the built environment. Her background includes energy auditing, technical calculations, climate action plans, and greenhouse gas inventory development, project management, and business development. And she got her degrees in civil and environmental engineering, as well as French language and culture, and is currently working towards a master's in business administration as well. Last but not least is Randall, and Randall is a graduate of UPenn with a bachelor's of science in mechanical engineering, and has 35 years experience in classified space programs, managing programs, major subcontracts, and engineering groups. And he has had a lifelong passion for cars since he was 10 years old, and especially electric cars. And a side note is that Randall is Jody's, our Director of Student Success husband. So, yeah. And with that, To learn more about our panelists, you all know that you can go to repicture.com/people and search our panelist names. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to move into our questions. All right. So our first question is going to be asked by Rivan. And Rivan is a high school junior from California and is also very interested in architecture. So Rivan, when you're ready, feel free to ask the first question.
Hello there. The question that I'm going to be asking is, how did you get to be working in the green energy field? How did you start out in this field?
And we can start with Amarilis first.
Sure thing. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. So my path was a little bit less orthodox than others, but when I was in college back in the late 90s and early 2000s, environmental studies were basically focused on traditional fields. So I studied the field of developing environmental management system or environmental engineering systems. And although at the time, the debate about the effects of climate change was heating up, there weren't too many university programs solely dedicated to green energy solutions. It was not until like 7 years after I graduated that I joined the Inter-American Development Bank, International Development Institution, where I had an opportunity to work in solid waste management programs in South America, and within that to learn about waste to energy and other alternative energy solutions. And so at the same time, I started working with a colleague on developing a methodology for estimating greenhouse gas emissions of our project portfolio at the IDB. And so, you know, understanding the huge impact that energy was having on global greenhouse gas emissions, I later on asked that I be added or to work for and with the team that focused on energy investments within my unit. So at that time, the market for renewables was basically, you know, taking off on some parts of Latin America, mainly hydro, but wasn't very well established. And, you know, since then, I moved on to the World Bank Group about 7 years ago. And by that time, renewables had just exploded in many development, you know, settings in many countries around the world. And so by the time I left the World Bank Group earlier this year, about 50% of my portfolio was in energy, and about 60% of that, if not more, maybe 70, was in renewables. So it has been a bit of a meandering path, but one that has been incredibly rewarding to experience. Thanks.
So thank you. Fred, would you like to go next?
So again, I guess my route is a little unorthodox as well. I never imagined that I would work anywhere except in media, radio, or television. My first job was at a radio station when I was 16 in Amherst, Massachusetts. I'd ride my bike after school and basically put the news show together and then read it that evening on the air. And so I spent all of those years up until my 40s essentially working on media projects of various sorts. And in a way, I was a soldier of fortune. I worked for some really onerous companies, actually. I made films for coal-burning power plants to convince people that those were really good things. Worked for all kinds of, let's say, odd and unusual political establishments, because that's where the money was. And it never occurred to me that I had something to say about any of these things other than sending them a bill for telling whatever story they wanted to pay me to tell. As I got older and more worldly and saw more of the world, and I saw more of the suffering in the world, particularly environmental suffering, I realized I wanted to change camps, but didn't really have the skills to do that. So I went to law school in my 40s. I was the oldest person in my law school class, but didn't really want to practice law. I wanted to transition. I wanted the skills that I could use to help communities and people kind of work on their own environmental problems. And I wanted a clear firewall between that other career, because frankly, everybody who knew me thought I was a guy involved with the television business. And I had trouble convincing people that this was not an internship or a midlife crisis. So I had to change my cell phone number. and basically, so the punchline is, now I run into people on airplanes and places, where I used to work with them at CBS or BBC or someplace like that. And they think I was dead. They actually say, "Oh my goodness, what happened to you? I thought you died." And and they'll ask me what I'm doing now, and I'll say, "Well, I'm working on this river, and I'm, an advocate for clean water." And I can see in their eyes kind of this idea forming. Now I'm really dead. I'm so irrelevant to that other career that I had that these guys think I really am dead. So that was kind of my root, was the recognition that the power of one person as an activist is quite extraordinary. You can do quite a bit to change the fate of the world, if you choose to do so. And I've never looked back, actually. Most of my family members are still involved with the business. They think I'm a traitor. What happened to you? You left the family business. It's like, yeah, but I'm making a difference now. I'm not just making a living, I'm making a difference.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Emily, would you like to go next?
Sure. I don't know how I'm going to top Fred. That's quite a story. So I think you're going to hear from all four of us that green energy is a pretty circuitous, meandering path. There's no real clear sustainability energy degree in school. So I studied civil engineering in college at the University of Virginia, and I got interested in that because my middle school growing up was a LEED certified building that used recycled materials. And I also volunteered with Habitat for Humanity a lot in high school and growing up. So I knew I wanted to do something in the built environment, and I was really interested in green and recycled materials. So that was undergrad. I also majored in French in undergrad, and the first year out of college, I moved to rural France and taught English, middle and high school English for a year. And while I was over there, there's such an emphasis on sustainability. There are windmills everywhere. Nuclear power was really big for France and continues to be today. And I watched this documentary while I was on a train traveling to visit up with a friend. It's really great. I think it's still on YouTube. It's called Before the Flood by Leonardo DiCaprio. And he interviews all these scientists and engineers about what's going on with climate change. And I just knew in that moment I wanted to apply my civil engineering background to making the climate a little bit cleaner and greener and gentler for everyone around us, including animals. And so I pivoted after my year in France. I just applied to anything where I could use my engineering background towards sustainability. And I landed with a small energy services company. There are about 20 of us, and we worked on energy savings performance contracts with federal facilities. And these are projects that paid for themselves through the energy and utility cost savings that they produced. So we'd figure out how an HVAC system, for example, that was more energy efficient could pay for itself over 15, 20 years just by installing it in that facility. I did that for a year. It was a really small company. And so I applied to work for AECOM. There was an opening in their project and construction management division. So I switched to that. I knew I still wanted to work in energy efficiency and clean energy, but I figured I might as well just get my foot in the door in this company and see what happens. And it turns out that they had a whole energy business line that I had no idea about when I applied and joined AECOM. So after a year with the company, I did an internal switch over to their energy and efficiency team, worked there for a couple years and realized that a lot of these clean energy projects get held up when it comes to funding, financing, contracting. So that's why I'm in business school now. I'm starting in the fall and I'll be there for 2 years. And my ultimate goal is to work on implementing clean energy projects.
Awesome. Thank you. And Randall?
Yeah, so I can't claim to have a lot of experience in clean energy, but in my 35-year career, I did work on a couple projects that are directly related. The primary one being for a couple of years, I was chasing after trying to convince the Army to buy a kit that we would design and build that would convert Humvees, which is a light armored vehicle, into a parallel hybrid vehicle. And part of the impetus for that was at the height of the Iraq and Afghan wars, getting fuel to various places in Iraq and Afghanistan in order to fuel armored vehicles was a huge burden, a huge logistical burden. And the bulk of the casualties that they were experiencing were due to improvised explosive devices damaging vehicles and either injuring or killing people. And so it seemed like a good idea to say, hey, you don't necessarily need fuel. You can use electricity, which you can generate more efficiently than trying. I mean, they were spending a huge amount of fuel just getting the fuel that they needed to the places that they needed it. And unfortunately, we were not successful in that effort. The Army they expressed some interest, but not enough to put up any money for us to do further development. And unfortunately, in my opinion, it seems like that was really a lost opportunity. But as I've been, as was mentioned in my profile, since I was about 10 years old, which is now 50 some years ago. I've loved cars, and a piece of that now is, of course, electric cars are sort of a whole new world that, when I was growing up, nobody had any idea about electric cars. And so, I think that's a really, fascinating area. And we do happen to own a plug-in hybrid vehicle, which is pretty cool. The first 29 miles, it runs purely on electricity. So a lot of the driving we do is done with just electric energy.
Awesome. Thank you all for your answers, and thank you, Ravon, for asking us to our panelists. Our next question is going to be asked by Anupama. And Anupama is a rising freshman at Piedmont Hills High School in California and aspires to be a physician or a researcher. So when you're ready, Anupama, feel free to ask your question.
Hi everyone. So today I'm going to ask that what is your typical day like in your life?
And Jerry, I think this one is for me. Is that correct?
Yeah, it'll be for you and Fred.
Perfect. Fred, I don't mind jumping ahead and then I'll turn it over to you. So I think this is important to know if you want to go into engineering or a more research type role. My typical day is split into thirds. So a third of it is project management, making sure that our projects are on time, on budget, and actually meet the scope of work that we said we were going to do. Another third of my time is writing and calculations. And then another third is business development. So reaching out to existing or potential clients to try to win new work. And I think it's important to remember, just because you're good at math and want to apply math, communication and writing is important no matter your field. So I had a lot of fellow classmates in engineering school who said, I don't want to take another writing class or communication class ever again. It's still important to cultivate those skills.
So one of the things I like about this work is it's never really the same on any given day. It's a lot of variety. I run a small nonprofit organization, so some of the stuff I do is actually rather mundane, like making sure the bills are paid and the grass is cut at the office, because we this summer during pandemic have not had a landscaper out there. So sometimes I'm doing that thing. Today I have work to do to prepare a legal brief for a case we're working on that's due in August, but it's a complicated brief. So I've started working on it early. I'm probably gonna have to spend some time at the state law library at some point working on that. I do a lot of just eye contact community organizing. We like to work with, and most of our work unfolds within actual communities where we're mentoring activism. We believe this is work that is planting seeds that'll live beyond our tenure, work that will stick around long after grants are gone, essentially. Helping communities speak on their own behalf on the issues that matter to them. So I'm working with social media stuff, I'm meeting with communities, I'm in the field, doing site visits. We manage restoration projects in some of the communities that we work with. What else? I have too much writing to do. I like to write, but I have trouble finding the headspace or the isolation space I need to concentrate on doing really quality writing. So that's a constant struggle. As I've aged, I'm well into my 60s now with 5 heart surgeries behind me. So now I take naps every day. I take at least a 1 hour nap throughout the day because my days often extend well into the evenings. I often have evening meetings, evening Zoom. During the pandemic, I must say my workflow became very erratic. I ended up getting a dog who became my roommate. I set up a blacksmithing shop in my front yard, and so I'm beating on metal at 2 in the morning, sometimes kind of working stuff out, working my ideas out to the rhythm of beating on the anvil. But I love that it requires a lot of you. You have to be interdisciplinary to do this work. You have to have your foot in lots of different areas, subject areas, things that you can work on. And ultimately, I love the people that we interact with, who are extraordinary activists, who have knowledge that they entrust to us. They share something of themselves with us in this work. And I think that's an honor and a privilege where people share with you the stuff that is most precious and closely held to their hearts about these waterways that we have in common, that we share. So I guess I'll stop there, but it's never the same 2 days in a row. It's always going to be a little bit of something different. And that's one of the things I really, really appreciate. But the pace is demanding. I must say, as I age, I'm looking for that younger riverkeeper who will someday take this work over, I hope. And I hope that will be a person of color, because I also believe that that's an important lens to have in this field of endeavor that we're involved in, that is often enough kind of claimed by people who are not BIPOC. There's an assumption, somehow, a presumption, you know, that we're bringing up the rear, and I think that's not fair. That's not true. We as people of color have a lot to bring to these movements to protect the environment, and we're much more than diversity. Let me say it that way. Diversity doesn't begin to capture what we are. We are stakeholders in these issues. So.
Amazing, thank you, Emily and Fred, and thank you, Anupama, for asking a question. And our next question is going to be asked by Catherine, one of our peer mentors, and she graduated from Catholic University in 2020 with a degree in civil engineering, and has completed her first year of a master's program in environmental engineering at Manhattan College. So if you'd like to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry, and thank you to all the panelists for taking time out of your day to be here. So my question is, what is your top career advice to both college or high school students?
And this question is for Amarilis and Randall.
Sure, so I can go ahead if you want, but I thought about this long and hard, and I can tell you so many different pieces of advice, like seize the opportunity, say yes, you know. But I thought if I could advise my freshman or my college self or my high school self, I would stress to her the importance of fostering mentorship and sponsorship relationships. I think if your school offers business networking training or programs, take advantage of them. I think having mentors, you know, today we live in such a virtual world, and it could be overwhelming to design a career path or to even understand what your options are. And so having mentors there can help you navigate your career development, your career options, you know, or simply provide professional and technical advice when you need someone more experienced than you to offer guidance. And on the other hand, sponsors, which is a very different role, I personally generally believe that they you know, are important in the workplace, especially those that are more bureaucratic and structured, to help you in your career advancement. This person is more able to sit at the table with senior management and to convey your value, you know, the value of your work up the chain. In like I said, in bureaucratic or more structured work environments, sometimes you might not be able to simply just advocate for yourself. So this is something that, you know, I found through my own, you know, experience working in different organizations, and something that nobody told me coming out of college back in the 90s. So one thing I will leave you with is, though, and very important, to be genuine in your relationships. I think that, you know, being genuine and realizing the importance of cultivating those relationships as you move forward, it's extremely important for the longevity of the relationships. So I'll stop there, but That's my 2 cents.
I definitely agree with what Amarilis said. I'll kind of focus on a couple other areas. One thing I would really emphasize is I'm going to shock everybody and tell you that I started my career back in 1979. And at that time, such a thing as a personal computer did not exist. Cell phones did not exist. And so throughout my career, I was constantly having to adapt to new technology, learn new things. And so I think a key role is, a key skill that I think engineers need to have is realize that learning is not going to end when you leave school, that it's going to continue throughout your career, and it's likely that you may wander into different fields. I've done a lot of different projects, constantly having to learn on the fly. So I think learning is a really, really key skill to have. The other thing I would suggest is that kind of goes along with that is I've always said, there's no such thing as a dumb question. A lot of people, feel a little tentative about, asking questions and thinking, oh, I'm going to come off sounding stupid or like I don't know anything or whatever. But I would be the first one to tell you, I've never thought less of somebody for, asking questions, because it shows they're interested. It shows they want to learn. And so I would say, if you don't understand something or you don't know something, ask.
Awesome. Thank you both. And thank you, Catherine, for asking this question. Our next question is for both Amarilis and Fred, and it's going to be asked by Tor. And Tor is an incoming master's student in civil engineering with a specialization in structural engineering. So Tor, when you're ready.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again to the panelists for taking this time to share with us your career. So my question today is, what is the most unique project that you've been involved with?
I remember seeing that question before, and it's a tough one because this work demands a lot of us, and you never quite know where it's going to take you. I've taken myself into some places I never thought I would go. I remember being in a public hearing, and we were really going down in flames. The crowd wasn't with us. And it occurred to me that we could probably change the outcome if our opponents just punched me in the nose. So I started really provoking this guy. I mean, I was up in his face, because I needed the distraction, like George Burns used to pull on a cigar, in order to find his timing. And I'm just, yeah, he was mad because, I remember this, he was mad because he said I had spoken to the media about his project, and he said that violated his constitutional rights. And I remember saying, oh, is that the Klingon Constitution? Which Constitution is that? I mean, I was about as obnoxious as you really want to be. I knew he had been a Secret Service agent in his past career because he carried a business card that said Special Agent in Charge. So I knew this guy had some skills, and I'm thinking like, I hope he doesn't really mess up my face. In the end, I could see him pretty tempted, but it wasn't the first or the last time I found myself, like I said, dipping into waters that were so far apart from who I really am. I'm not that guy, but the work has taken over my desire not to fail, not to fail utterly. I mean, I know I'm not going to clean up the Patuxent River all by myself in my lifetime, but the more people tell you what you can't do, for some of us, and I'm one of those guys in that category, it's a challenge not to fail. And so sometimes you're hanging on for dear life, just hoping not to fail utterly and completely. Can I pull something out of this that's a win? I mean, we have plenty of wins too. Let me be clear about that. But I know that this is a game, a running game, where you have to take your wins and your losses. And so that's probably a smoky answer to the question, because a lot of our projects are pretty cut and dry, right? There's a restoration project, or there's a piece of litigation we have to do, or there's some policy that we want to change or we want to lobby for. And that's pretty routine, kind of, straight line, going from point A to point B. In between A and B is a lot of stuff that you really can't put in a book. You can't really write down, you can't teach, you have to feel it. You have to go with it. So the bar fights, I've been on the Eastern Shore with a bunch of chicken guys who were mad about our industrial farming operations, you know, that took me to some really crazy places in my head when I realized I'm not the guy I started out being. I'm a different guy now, 18 years later. On a 5-year journey, I really thought 5 years was as long as I'd want to do the river keeping thing, because I thought that was as long as I could afford to work for that kind of pay. Now the work's become a part of me in a way that I just can't fail. And so now I have to stick with this stuff. And like I said, it takes me to Klingon and beyond and beyond sometimes.
Great. So maybe I'll jump in. And I also struggle with this question because I love all of my projects, but in the spirit of keeping it in the green energy field, I thought I would share with you two very important projects to me. And it might not sound too unique, but the lesson behind them is sort of unique. So I worked in these two projects in sub-Saharan Africa, one in South Africa, wind farm projects, and one in Senegal, in the western part of Africa. And so the one in sub-Saharan Africa comprised 5 large wind farms, you know, all together. It took us a week to go from east to west in the country, and presented some very unique challenges with regards to, you know, how do you as an environmental scientist evaluate 5 different ecological regions in such a vast, because like talking about the United States, right? So, you know, despite the fact that wind power projects might not have your traditional, like significant environmental impacts in the construction part and implementation, you know, as we're used to seeing in other projects, you have to really consider the ecological effects of them, you know, on biodiversity, and more so the impacts that they bring to communities and communities that are affected by them positively and negatively. So, you know, in South Africa, our partner was very great. The project proponent did a great job isolating the project from, you know, communities, but the project, some of them ended up being so isolated that the cost of implementing the project skyrocketed. And you can see where I'm going with this. Oftentimes we hear in renewable energy that cost trumps, you know, the benefits of implementing renewables in favor of fossil fuels based sources, which to me, you know, not to quote Fred here, gets into the political discourse. But in any case, you know, these projects, you know, eventually with much good collaboration in South Africa, we were able to, you know, mitigate some impacts, some significant impacts to avifauna that we had, you know, protected bird species flying through where the wind farms were coming to be placed. You know, we practice microsighting of the wind turbines. We practice offsetting some endemic plant species. We did all the things that, you know, the book says, and it was fantastic. Now, fast forward to Senegal. In Senegal, you know, although the biodiversity impacts and the ecological impacts were more limited, I realized that, you know, going from one country to another, the community impacts took precedence. There, you know, we had a completely different situation. The community was very strongly present, and it took a lot of public consultation for us, you know, to understand what this project meant to them, even from cultural, you know, cultural important areas. You know, in some parts of Africa, baobab trees are very culturally important, and not touching them. And so eventually, you know, through much consultation and much working with the community and fantastic partners and clients, we were able to implement this project also and bring benefits to the community. We were able to restore local markets for the women to sell their products. We were able to implement a technology education program for kids, probably some your age, that didn't have access to computers and technology. And we were able to improve the ability of basic healthcare services for those communities that were so impoverished. So at the end, you know, this, yeah, it could be unique, maybe not. What does that have to do with green energy engineering? But here is the thing, you know, the political discourse again today is the renewable technologies are too expensive. And yes, although these projects were successful, in some parts of the world, these technologies are definitely much more costly than fossil fuel-based alternatives. But I think it's impending upon us, right? It's important to keep in mind that from a scientific perspective, we are instrumental to prove and articulate the longer-term benefits are greater, in my experience anyway, than of these projects, right? They're greater than the challenges that they pose. So for me, these two projects back in 2017 were the first time that it dawned on me, right? I was going at it like a straight engineer, or scientist. And it dawned on me that we as scientists also have to plug in the rest of the implementation of the project and understand that the long-term impacts can outweigh the challenges in the short distance. So that's served my story to live out there for you. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you both. And we'll move on to our next question that's going to be asked by Max. And Max is a high school student interested in pursuing a career in architecture. And so when you're ready, Max, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, yeah, thank you all for coming. I just wanted to ask, what is something about green energy that most people do not know?
And this question is for Emily and Randall. And if we have a little bit more time, I'd love to hear from everyone.
I can go first. So I think there are two main things that people don't realize when it comes to one, it's highly interdisciplinary, which goes back to what Fred was saying. And two, it's highly relevant, which Amarilis kind of was touching on just a minute ago. So the first piece, like I said earlier, there are very few schools that offer sustainability engineering majors. So it's really a blend of civil, mechanical, electrical engineering, at least with the type of energy efficiency work that I do. So even though I didn't study mechanical or electrical engineering in school, I kind of had to brush up on both. You have to know a little bit about all three of those to be able to be effective in the field. Also, it's not just technical solutions. For example, my favorite project that I have ever worked on, I led development of Montgomery County, Maryland's Climate Action Plan, which they just released a couple months ago. They want to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. And so we did the technical calculations and modeling to prioritize, okay, these are the actions that you need to do and when. Start in your grid, cleaning up your grid, because that'll have ripple effects to transportation. If you switch to electrifying your vehicles, you need to have a renewable grid first. So we laid out a timeline for them and prioritized 86 actions that they need to take to hit their 2035 goal. And it wasn't just engineering. We worked with climate resilience experts to look at, okay, by 2035, by 2100, what is your topography and weather patterns going to look like? How much more frequently will flooding occur and where in the county? We also worked with racial equity and social justice experts to help them prioritize what areas of the counties they should prioritize when implementing these actions. So it's a really fun space to be in because you're not just working on engineering problems, you're working on societal problems. And to my second piece, so highly interdisciplinary, highly relevant. Climate change is here. I mean, we are experiencing that every day in the news. If you look at wildfires or extreme weather in Texas, which never freezes, for their whole electrical grid to go down in February. These are real problems, and it only is becoming more increasingly relevant. So it's a fun space to work in because this is the time to be working on updating our grid and our infrastructure to counter climate change. So it's exciting, and we need all of you to help out in the field.
And I guess I would follow up on what Emily was saying. I just recently read Bill Gates's book about the climate crisis, and pretty much, his take is we're putting about 58 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year. And the estimate is that we need to get that to zero by 2050. And, I sit here now and realize, that's less than, 30 years away. And I think about the rate at which we're making progress towards that goal. And, I have to say, if we continue at the current pace, I don't think we're going to make it. So I think that really trying to get people to focus on, that is, and the problem is if we don't get there by 2050, then it's likely that we're going to get into a scenario where we're going to have irreversible climate change, because things like the solar ice cap, so the polar ice caps will melt, and that increases, or I'm sorry, that decreases the reflectivity at the poles, which means you get more heating in the atmosphere, and there's not an easy way to reverse something like that. So there really is a pretty hard deadline out there that I think people need to be very focused on in order to avoid really even more severe climate change than what we're seeing now.
Awesome, thank you. I'm gonna move on to the lightning round questions, and then if we have time, we'll go back to that question for Amarilis and Fred. But for the lightning round questions, we're gonna limit this to everyone with one phrase or word. And I'm going to pose two questions because maybe they'll go hand in hand, and if not, that's okay too. But it is, what is your most important skill, and what class have you used the most? And I'm going to go in the order of my screen. So Randall, if you'd like to start.
Well, I'd say, my most important skill probably is the ability to learn on the fly. I worked, throughout my 35-year career, I worked on many different projects. A lot of times I was dropped into an ongoing project. I had to adapt to a team, figure out what was going on, provide solutions, do that all very quickly and effectively. And the ability to adapt and learn on the fly, I think, was really key in being able to do that successfully. And probably the class that I used the most was probably, I would say, strength of materials, because we were dealing with a lot of different materials, a lot of materials together that had a lot of different coefficients of thermal expansion and stuff. And so we're constantly having to figure out whether stuff would hold together for the amount of time that we needed it to.
Awesome, thank you. Fred, would you like to go next?
I think I have acquired over the years the skill of synthesizing information. It was a very useful skill in law school, actually. And ironically, I don't know that I can really convince people of this, it really grew out of my work in television and film for all those years, because lighting, you learn the concept of negative space. In effect, you learn what's missing. You learn to look at the world and align things in such a way that you can see where the holes are. It's a very hard skill to teach, and maybe even a hard skill to acquire, because it means you end up with kind of a gut instinct for what's broken. And you don't have to be a doctor to be able to tell when somebody is sick. You may not have the resolution, but you can see where the problem is, which is really hard to do, right? There's so much data and so much information out there now. It's sometimes really hard to find kind of a center, to center yourself. So I do think that's a particular knack that has stood me in good stead along the way. And the ability to write well, to speak well, to communicate ideas, to break concepts down to a level where people can easily access the information. There's a knack to that. And that's, again, a skill that came from media, the ability to take a news story or a piece of information under time pressure and write it up quickly. This will be on the air in 15 minutes. You've got 10 minutes to write it. Not a lot of room, not a lot of margin for error there. So I think those are skills that have stood me in good stead throughout. And a lot of the teaching that I do nowadays, I teach at Goddard College in Vermont, and there I and another person run the sustainability and social innovation programs. And those are people who want to change the world. They understand systems, they understand systemic thinking, and they understand that to change the world, you have to change the underlying systems. And I think the ability to discern ideas, to synthesize ideas, to write, communicate, lay ideas out, all of that goes into that type of activism, because I do believe there's activism that changes the world, not 9-to-5 jobs usually, but people who are prepared to step outside of that role and actually work on changing what's wrong, what's broken.
Awesome, thank you. Emily, would you like to go next?
Sure. So my big two, communication, which multiple of us have touched on, and problem solving. In engineering school, you learn how to lay out a problem, figure out what variables you have, what variables you're missing, and what formulas to apply. And it's not as clear cut as what you do in an exam in real life, but the same type of thinking is really useful. And then in terms of my favorite class that I've applied, I took a series of engineering ethics classes at the University of Virginia. And I think it's really important to think about what are the potential unintended consequences of a technical fix or a technical solution that we're bringing into the world. Could it possibly have negative effects down the line to society?
So Emily just stole it from me, but I will add another spin to it. I had, for my two skills, I gotta say, I cannot stress enough that the ability to understand and apply diverse perspective to problem solving, it's a must, right? I think because in doing so, you can anticipate like different ways of failure of a solution. You get creative, and you understand that not every solution merits the same approach. Alternatively, and to my communication spiel, let me just hone down on active listening, because a well-rounded communication package is very important, but active listening to me stands out as you know, right next to writing and be able to articulate an idea. And I find that that's not as common as we would want it to be. So those two are great skills for me that have helped me, and that, you know, are great for professionals to have. In terms of the course, I was thinking about this, and I think environmental measurements was my most useful course. I live by the motto still today, even in my personal life, which is a little weird, that if you cannot measure it, you cannot analyze it, you cannot manage it, and you cannot improve it, right? So environmental measurements to me, followed by the capstone projects. In my case, in my bachelor's education, I had a capstone, a design project. And that's the first time that to me all came together, right? Everything that I learned came together. And I still think of similitudes with the work I'm doing today in some areas in that capstone. And for my master's, I had a capstone that had an international residency. So that added another layer to the kind of work that I wanted to do. So those were my most important courses in school. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you all. And just looking at the time, so typically we would end at 1:45, but I did want to leave some time for students to ask questions if they have them. So for our panelists, are you all able to stay until 2? Okay, and when you have to leave, you can leave, it's okay. But do any students have questions that they'd like to ask all or some of the panelists? And feel free to use the chat. And also, if you want me to ask them for you, you can send them to me.
I want to ask another question if you don't mind.
Sure.
Oh,
I was just going to say real quick, Tor, if anybody's
my
interested
audio.
in learning more about climate action, I included a link in the chat to Montgomery County, Maryland's climate action plan.
Okay.
Back to you.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, Tor, yeah.
Is my audio okay?
Yeah, it's good, yeah.
So I just have a question. It's not a well-formed question, but I was thinking, what do you think is the future of green energy, like worldwide? Like, do you think it's something that is achievable without, like, you know, ignoring the political aspect of it that comes into?
Well, I think Emily kind of touched on this, or it might have been one of the others, but it's expensive. Well, there's going to have to be some reckoning, some transfer of wealth that has to occur to make it possible for some of these places, countries, to bring themselves up to whatever that state of the art is. Moreover, in our country, we have a regulatory problem, right? We still have a problem admitting that coal, you know, is a hazardous substance. I don't think it's classified as that under federal law. You know, the truth is, people are really interested in this stuff all over the world, but not everybody can afford it, essentially. And money does talk. Money does actually is kind of the equalizer on some of this stuff. When I was traveling a few years ago, I backpacked across Bulgaria. Bulgaria was one of the last 2 countries admitted to the European Union. Bulgaria has millions of dollars of grants that they've had to return to the European Union because they don't have the technological ability in the country to actually implement and execute these environmental grants. I found beaches in Bulgaria covered as far as the eye could see with sanitary napkins and trash, literally. I mean, a place where they only had wastewater treatment plants about 20 years ago. They were dumping their sewage into the Danube River, basically. You know, these are developing nations that are trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And if you ever tried to do that, it can't be done. There's really no way to pull yourself up by your bootstrap because you'll keep falling down. And so there does need to be some humanitarian and economic reckoning that helps spread that wealth. Right. I'll say one last thing on that. You know that obviously Jeff Bezos went into space this week and he came back. And you know, one of the things he said was widely reported was, we should send our polluting industries into outer space. Great. So now we need to start polluting outer space. How sustainable is that? We have to change the system. We have to change to technologies that don't pollute. We're not going to export this madness to Mars. When's that going to happen? That's my take on it.
I may be able to add if we have time, Jerry, if not.
Oh, yes. If you, before you give your answer, I'm also going to pose this in connection with Tor's question, but someone else asked what type of careers do you think will be available in green energy as well? So in connection with the future of green energy, but yeah.
So maybe I can loop the 2 questions and others can jump in because we have actual energy specialists in the panel, but I was thinking about this. And so I think that to tie what Frederick was saying to some of the things that have been said, you know, the goals of the Paris Agreement, and that is the one international agreement that we have, you know, push us towards this whole idea of net zero by 2050 emissions. And in order to do so, we are going to have to be able to get very creative and shift some markets very quickly. I mean, people don't think sometimes of all the industries and sectors that need to be decarbonized, but one of them, aside from transportation, right, and the energy sector, is the industry sector, right? Heavy industry like steel, cement, still hasn't found a way of decarbonizing. So in thinking of what would happen in the next 15 years or so, you know, technologies needs to switch quickly, and so do markets. And I was thinking that green hydrogen, you know, is something that is being talked about a lot in order to decarbonize industries, and transportation might be a career, you know, down the line, like maybe a green hydrogen energy specialist or some sort of position like that. But all in all, to say that hydrogen in itself can be very energy consuming and intensive, but you know, the way technology is going, perhaps there is a space there for producing hydrogen utilizing renewables. So these are all the things that, as Frederick said, we got to put money into the problem, and we got to move very quickly if we want to achieve a true economic decarbonization. And remind you that this is globally by 2050. So that's my take on where we're going, but I'm hopeful that we will get there.
I can go next. So adding to what Fred and Amarilis said, I think we got to think about it in terms of energy and in terms of carbon. So on the energy standpoint, we just have to convert our power plants. We can use a lot of the same transmission and distribution lines to run power straight to our homes and our buildings, like standard power plants do today. But we've just got to convert those. And the tricky thing, this goes back to what Fred said with regulation. In the US, we are set up as a capitalistic society. So we have lots of different utilities that function as private companies that are on the stock market and publicly traded. And so it's really tough to have influence over all these different utilities in every different county or state, whatever level you're at. China, for example, to give an opposite comparison, because they're a communist society, they have one major utility. So they're 30% renewable energy. And they just said from the top down, we're going to switch our power plants, and they can do it easy as that. So pros and cons to both different types of society, but a huge point of interest when it comes to cleaning up our energy system. On the carbon side, so the European Union just released their climate action plan last week, and they're proposing putting a carbon tax on imports from other countries that have high greenhouse gas emission outputs. So this would have a huge impact on the US, and China would add a heavy tax to anything that we ship over to Europe that's imported to them. So we're starting to see lots of different policies being proposed to reduce our carbon emissions. So thinking about it both from an energy and a carbon standpoint.
Awesome. So I'm going to close this out because we're just about at 2. But I want to thank you all for being here, and I've learned a lot. And I definitely, this makes me sort of look at where I could go in the future with like the career that I want to go into. And I hope some other students, maybe everyone, felt that way as well. I'm going to, so Miriam, I'm going to send this question to the panelists, unless the panelist wants to answer this like in the chat maybe. But I want to respect everyone's time. So thank you all again for coming. Thank you to student participants for asking questions, and for students just being here. And just a reminder that this Friday is our social. We're going to do some public speaking presentation practice stuff, but it should be fun. So please come to that. And if you want to ask more questions to the panelists, send those to me, and I will send them. I will send them all like a consolidated list of questions, so that'll be a bit easier.